Welcome, and it's very exciting here tonight on the Feminine Force as we have Carolyn Murphy-Bennis back with us.
Hi, everyone.
Sorry, I cut you off there, but I was just so excited. I had to say something before we had our little music.
No problem, Lisa. Thrilled to be back, everyone. Hi. I'm so delighted to be back. And just so you don't know, my mum passed away a couple of days ago. So that's why and she was very sick for a long time, struggling with breast cancer. So she passed peacefully a few days ago. So yeah, I'm back now with Lisa, and back to the lives, back to the inquiry, and the yeah. Let's see where this takes us in the next phase of the feminine force.
Limitless life on the feminine force, limitless life.
And thank you to Ali for helping, and she's still going to be involved with us. But really thrilled to have her cover for me.
Yeah,
amazing.
It's been wonderful. She's done a good job. She's done
amazing.
A good job. So Carolyn and I have been having a little bit of a conversation earlier this evening, and we thought we would share it with you because it's very much about our emerging process as human beings in the world. And it stemmed from an incident that I had the other day. Well, not an incident, a situation. I was playing tennis with my older daughter, actually, and she had beaten me in this first game, and I'm not particularly competitive, but what I noticed was starting the second game and losing, like, to her quite effectively, I noticed this shadow come over me, and it really felt like a shadow. And what it was the part of me that was like, well, you're not going to win anyway. You're not good enough. You may as well give up. You may as well. And it was really heavy. And I remember feeling this a lot as a child, like this. I wasn't competitive. So if I was losing, I wouldn't just like fire up. I would be the kid that would just go, oh, I'm not going to try because I might not win, and I could feel this shadow coming over me, and I was witnessing it. Like, I could actually see it very clearly. And it was so interesting. I'm like, oh, look at that feeling. And I was like really in touch with this vulnerable, childlike part of myself that was feeling this want to give up, this want to not even try.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I saw my daughter down the other end of the tennis court, and I'm like, how lucky am I to be here with this beautiful soul? And I was just looking at her enjoying playing tennis, and the birds were chirping and the sun was shining. I was just like, I am so grateful. And I just really got into the joy of that moment of just really experiencing this connection and being with my daughter and having this opportunity. And I felt this visceral shift in the field around me. Now, I've never felt this before. It was so subtle. And we hear all the time that, if you listen to Abraham Hicks, and there's so many inspirational speakers that talk about when you feel it, you change the world around you. It's like you get into a vortex and you start to manifest things, like you're creating, like we hear it. I've heard this before. I know that for me to be in a state, a positive state really helps create a better reality. But in that moment, when I chose to see the shadow and acknowledge it and accompany it for a minute, but then shift into the joy of the moment and really the gratitude, I could feel the field actually, it was almost, I could feel it respond, and it shifted, and I felt its support, like really wanted to give me more joy. Like, I could feel this visceral, like it was so amazing. And I'm just like, oh my God. And like, I realized how powerful I was in that moment and what a creator I am. And I'd known it, I've had experiences, but to actually feel the subtlety in that moment was just so profound for me. And for a whole, like, even now, I still feel like, wow, I just have this whole new understanding of the universe. Just, just being in that joy, but allowing the feeling, but being in that the feeling space that changes that field around me. And then, of course, my mind got involved, right? So I'm on my walk yesterday, and my mind is going, oh, okay, so I've got these things that I feel really passionate about doing. And then I'm like, oh, but if I'm feeling passionate about doing it, maybe this is not what I should be doing. Is this, the divine will for me? How do I know I'm not getting in my own way? And how do I know if I'm really feeling joy, if this is what I should be doing? And so of course I was talking to Carolyn about this, and it's like my mind then started to question it. And Carolyn had some beautiful things to share with me, which I'd love to invite you to share, Carolyn, because it was just such a lovely way to describe how inspiration works, the way it works for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying there, because it is the way I suppose we talk about be co-creators, with the universe, or being limitless and things like that. And it's very, these are words we don't really know exactly what does that feel like and what's the process as such. And when you were describing that to me, I really picked up on the word joy, because joy for me is like that's a state of creation. Like, you're in when you're in joy, it's not so much even that you're creating, it's like that the, the universe, or the creativity is going to flow from you, in that state. You're always going to create something beautiful from that state when you're in joy, because it's like as if joy is, it's not just your joy, it's the joy of living, the joy of being
Mm,
alive, the joy of being present in the moment. That's the flow of life, the fluidity, the stream when it's flowing, like when you're in the fluidity of life, and the flow, like the flow state is the state of joy, and it's like, I suppose the training is to try and how do you stay in that flow state. And it's like exactly the contrast that you experienced there was like you kind of the old thoughts and emotions that were starting to come over you. Um, and you had the power in the moment to be able to become aware of that, so that you can choose then the actual reality that you were in, which was beautiful experience with your daughter, in the moment, in joy. But you could also see the dark side coming in, what I mean? So you could have actually chose either of those. You could have gone into a mood
mm,
as such, and been drawn back down into that and say, I don't feel like, I don't feel like playing, and etc. etc. If you weren't aware, you didn't have the awareness of what actually
mm,
was happening in those two different states as such. And for me, when it was interesting, we were talking, because I was like, my experience of creativity or direction or calling, whatever you want to call it, all those words, is actually when I feel excited, like I get it. I just like I
mm,
get all of a sudden I get it, like an idea, like I just go, oh my God, I feel like I'd like to do this, or I'd like to go here, or I'd like to, and I get this feeling. It always starts with a feeling. It's like, ooh, like a wish of something. It's like the feeling comes first, then the idea comes to the head, and I kind of, then I realize, but it's not even like I want to do it. It's like it wants to be done through me, and it's like
yeah,
all of, and I always know, like, because it's always something that will really fire me up in all my different, my intellect, my creativity, my connection with other people, when they all those switches, like in a spaceship or something like that, would all start to turn on. When people say, "Oh, you
mm,
get turned on," well, I get turned on in life too. Like when you want to be creative, because that's eros, that's the spirit of creativity. Like it's that energetic kind of drive to want to move you forward, to propel you. But it's not because of you want to get a certain outcome. It's because it starts to arise in you, and you want to move forward, and it propels you into certain direction. So you get really excited. So it's like as if, I think really when your intentions are always to just bring that creativity through yourself, then it's much more pure, and it has that co-creative feeling about it, because you're not doing it for an outcome. You're doing it for the pure joy of creation, and being part of the
yeah,
process of creation, life itself as such. And that's then you never really know where that's going to take you. That could, when you just, your job then is just to act on that and use the mind then to kind of, bring that into the world, you know. So to me, that's kind of the magic of life, you know, because you're in that eros, you're in the creative flow, and it's you're really on purpose then, you know, you're really in your purpose and you're being used to the fullest of your capacity at this point in time, you know. And it changes all the time, but it's definitely that state of joy and that
Mm,
state of is the state of creativity. Yeah,
mm.
absolutely.
Like that, you are your purpose.
Yeah.
Mm. And it was really interesting because as you were saying that, I was like, when you said there was a choice in that moment for me, it's interesting, isn't it? Like I hadn't reflected on it like that before. When my wound turns up and the shadow comes over me, I don't see reality anymore.
Mm.
And the reality was that it was a beautiful day. There was nothing going on. Whether I won or not didn't matter. It was a great experience that I was having with my daughter, you know, like, but the wound, when that wound shows up, it can totally change the way we feel about the moment that we're having, you know. And even because I have been practicing this in other times when certain feelings come up, and just saying to myself, oh, there's my wound, you know, like actually being able to go, oh, that's my wound showing up now, enables me to distance myself a little bit from it. And
Mm.
it can show up as anything. It can show up as, you know, just like not feeling good enough, or um, rushing, like rushing through my life. You know, like I know that that's my having to get somewhere, you know, like having to do things. So, yeah, and when I look back on my life, because I was doing this last week, reflecting on my teenage years, and how when I remember back, I remember feeling so alone. Nobody understood me. I wasn't supported. I just felt, as you do as a teenager, right, that nobody understands and that you're isolated and you're in your bedroom crying into your pillow. But when I looked back, not through my wound, I actually looked back with open eyes. I realized how many people around me loved me and how much support I actually had. But at the time, I couldn't see it
Yeah.
because of my wound, you know, like what was being activated in me completely covered the reality. But the reality was I was actually having a pretty good time, you know, like I was going out with friends, I was going to the beach, I was hanging out with guys, I was partying, you know, I had lots of love around me, but none of that was sort of my perception. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's so interesting how our perceptions, like,
Yeah, it's like a
uh,
veil, it's like a cloud, you
mm,
know, the way it's like the
mm,
sun is
mm,
always shining, you know, there's always like
mm,
the lights in the background here, always shining, you know.
mm.
But what clouds our perception, you know,
Mm,
it's experiences that we haven't integrated, you know, and emotion experience, like you talk about Lisa, the emotion education, then going back into looking at um those experiences, those emotional baggage that
mm,
needs to be lived because it hasn't really been processed in that moment. So you're bringing it with you everywhere. So it's
mm. Yeah,
overshadowing your present moment, you know. And
yeah,
like it's funny how I suppose it's nearly a talk for another topic, but the quality of presence. You know, people say to be present, but there's different qualities of being present. You know,
mm,
you the more it's like pushing. I was talking about the pushing. Like, what does that mean? It's like the strength of your presence is always to do with the amount of healing that you've done. So, like, you can be present in the moment, and your perception is a lot different to somebody else who's sitting present in the moment with you, but they haven't. They're still looking through life through these certain veils, so they can't
yes,
see they're not experiencing life in the same way because they're overshadowed by their emotional experience that they haven't integrated yet and they haven't made
mm,
peace with yet, you know. So it always kind of clouds their judgment and their perception of other people is always being looked through this veil of emotional hurt, you know, and trauma. And
mm,
you know, it can't be any other way unless they start to do that, you know, and become aware of it. Awareness is the
mm,
first step, you know.
mm,
So given you being aware of that, that was a shadow that was over starting to over come over your present
mm,
moment, you know, that was going to interfere with your experience of where you are now and how that affects all the other moments that are to come. Like it
mm,
could easily affect the relationship with you had with your daughter, and she could get really annoyed about that. Why is mom not wanting to play tennis with me? Like it could be something about me. And you know what I mean? It starts to kind of
mm,
have this
mm.
effect on her then because she's like questioning and worried about you and taking her emphasis off her joy in her life. And you know what I mean? It has that,
Mm,
that the spiraling down,
yeah,
because it bringing back down into this kind of darker place as such where, when you're
yeah,
kind of conscious and you're aware, you're always expanding and you're growing and you're allowing more light to come in. So it's like another way, like it's like a funnel as such, that the more you
yeah,
feeling it do, the more light that you can kind of take into yourself, like, so it's like it's so key to be aware enough, like you did in that moment, to be able to put your emphasis on
mm,
the beauty that's all around you, and then to kind of see, but that was an old experience, and that's not me, an
yeah,
old version of myself, like yeah. So it's so
yeah, and not hooking onto it, like, it felt to me like,
mm,
it felt to me like and more and more these days when I'm noticing these feelings come up and I'm just acknowledging that this is just it's my wound appearing or it's
mm,
my
mm, mhm,
I'm being activated,
mhm.
but I'm not hooking onto it.
Yes,
So
yes,
whereas it's like it can pass, and
yeah,
that is and it's almost like an alchemical process because whereas once upon a time I would have been going, oh, what do I have to do about this? Or how can I fix this? Or I've got to feel through this. I've got to, but now it's almost like it comes up in my awareness, I witness it, and it's like if
mm,
I don't hook onto it, it just shifts. It just transforms itself.
yeah,
And it's in that moment, and we actually were talking a little about this before, how beautiful to be able to, and like for me, and I'm not saying that this happens all the time, but I'm noticing more and more this is happening, how beautiful to be able to do this in the moment so I can keep living my life.
yes, yes,
So that as these things come up, I can actually process them in that moment and then go forward and keep moving forward with life as it evolves through me and not having to be held up by a feeling reaction to this moment that I
mhm,
can't move through.
yeah. And it kind of takes you just to slow down. Slowing down, helps with that. Like I was actually saying to my sister-in-law the other day, my dad gave me some advice years ago. When I was learning to drive, he always said, um, you can't make it's very difficult to make a mistake when you're going slow. And I always think that in life even. So if you're slowing down and you're watching yourself and you're seeing that and giving your time to understand what's happening and just see it and then choosing, what your next right action is, it just makes you much more, I suppose, you're much more powerful in the world
Mm,
because then it's conscious decision that you're making all the time, that you're creating your world around you consciously. Otherwise, you're not in control. You don't have any power. You're powerless because your past
mm,
is running the show. So you're not really
yes.
creating you're not becoming you're not growing into your full potential. Full
Mm,
potential is always going to be following that joy, following that creativity, what you love, what you really want to do, what lights you up, what inspires you, being around the people like that, connecting. And it's a brilliant what you said as well about when you were a teenager and how you were isolated, because that is what happens when you're in the wound. You go into yourself, and you tighten it yourself,
mm,
and there's no one else no one can access you, you can't access anyone else. So like the healing is like when you can be around people and you can accept other people as they are, and they can accept you, and you can actually receive that love from them. You know what I
mm,
mean? That you can
mm,
see, yeah. Like I've been at that state as well. You kind of look back and say, wow, like I had so much support around me, but maybe I didn't feel like I had it
mm,
because I had closed
mm,
myself down to that, but that's a trauma reaction. So it's amazing that even to see yourself in the world growing when you can have the ability to connect with other people is a really fabulous sign. But also to know that when you're not, that's also a sign that you're in your wound. Yeah.
mm, mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can't feel that. And like I've watched this a few times with my clients, even when they say, "I don't feel supported," and like it doesn't matter how much you give somebody
Mm,
support, if you're not supporting yourself,
mm,
then you won't feel supported.
mhm.
If you're not feeling connected in yourself, then you're not going to feel connected no matter how many people are
Mm,
trying to
mhm,
connect with you.
mm.
It's like, and often what I've been sort of really reflecting on lately is it's sort of counterintuitive sometimes that when we're in pain, we want to close down and we don't want to talk to anybody. But
Yes,
actually, the best thing is to reach out to the right people and to connect, to actually go against what we feel. That's where the
absolutely.
healing comes in.
That's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. Because I was saying that to you recently as well, that
Mm,
I catch
mm,
myself and say, what you would have done before is this
yeah,
strategy, but do the opposite. Do the opposite, the
yes,
opposite,
yeah,
because that doesn't actually make you feel good. And when you do the
mm,
opposite, then it always makes you feel better and get relief from it. Where if
mm,
not, you're just stuck in that dynamic and that cycle of,
mm,
I suppose it's just a downward spiral, isn't it? Like you talk about with
mm,
the tennis, like, and you went on to
mm,
have a lovely day and a beautiful conversation. You
mm,
learned something from it, that
mm,
experience, like you
mm,
brought a learning out from that. Yeah, so like it's just awareness, isn't it? And being
mm.
connected to your emotional state.
I mean, yeah, that's true. Like I find that every time I play tennis, that
Yeah,
seems to happen to me. Something comes up in my body. It
yeah.
must be like a meditation or something. I'm not sure tennis for me because like something will come up in my body. So as I'm playing, I'm aware of all these other energies that are happening, even with the other player sometimes, and
Oh,
I'm witnessing it as I'm playing. I go, maybe I'm just a bit strange, but I
yeah,
find I aspire a lot through
yeah.
playing tennis. It's sort of
There you
amazing.
go. Depends. Everybody has something different. Yeah.
It's so funny. But I mean that's the way forward that I see so often now. It's like in that moment, if I feel and I choose differently, I can keep moving with life.
Yes.
Otherwise, I just repeat the same cycle. Like I'm recycling because I
Yeah.
sort of get blocked and I just recycle and
Yeah.
recycle. So it's much
Yeah.
better for me to feel into the block and question it and allow it to process and integrate.
Mm.
And then I can actually move with life
Yeah,
and
and
through
I
life.
think you can transcend those as well. The more you do
Mm,
that, that won't show up anymore.
absolutely. I agree.
So like the more
Mm,
you face that each time and you put the light of awareness on it, that it's dissolves. It's like the sun, when there's clouds there and like eventually the sunshine keeps shining and shining and shining, the clouds just
yeah,
disappear because the heat just dissolves it.
yeah.
So it just eventually does, you can't transcend those parts of yourself, those shadows.
Yes.
When they move on and then you won't feel that anymore. You start paying
Yeah.
attention, it won't come up anymore. Something else might come up, but it won't be that. It'll be another thing that you have to
Yeah,
work
yeah.
on.
Which is great because
Yeah,
that's life,
yeah,
isn't it? Without the
yeah,
uncertainty, we can't have the certainty. It's like we need both sides to be whole. So,
yeah, yeah, that's the word.
it would be boring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant, what you call it, point, because the way when you talk, I was think for me, like, it's all about living life. It's not about sitting in meditation. So it's like
Yes.
lovely to sit in meditation, be quiet and enjoy that. But really, we're here to live. We're here to be
Yes.
active in the world and to be in the fullest sense of ourselves, not to be checked out. So like even the idea of like tennis being like meditation, you got as much
Yeah.
there than you did if you were sitting at home, trying
Yeah.
to, yeah. So it's just everything that comes into your awareness is always part of your teaching. Life is a teaching. Yeah, it's a classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. It's so true.
Good.
Well, I have enjoyed this conversation again. So juicy, and it's so wonderful to have you back. Thank you for
Oh,
joining us tonight and being with us to find out about the limitlessness of life.
woo! Yeah, fantastic to be
Yeah.
back, everybody. Delighted to be here and always join us when you can. And we're delighted to, if you make any comments, we love interaction, don't we, Lisa?
We
And you
certainly
can,
do. And it
yeah.
inspires us for future conversations. So it's important.
Yeah.
Remember to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss notifications when we turn up live.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you again. Have a beautiful evening or day wherever you are in the world.
Bye,
Thank
everyone. See
you.
you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.